So now for something completely different. You've heard a lot about communication and outreach, and Tyler's presentation is a little bit different than that. Oops. So Tyler was born and raised in Hawaii, where some of his fondest childhood memories include exploring tide pools and fishing with his family. He's excited to use the lessons he learned during his time at Scripps as he pursues his career in ocean policy. So Tyler's a lawyer. Tyler was doing criminal law work in Hawaii before he came here to San Diego. And I knew, it was like a couple weeks into the summer course, I would say, I knew that I was going to be on his Capstone committee, and I was probably going to be his chair. He was just, any mention of anything law-related at all, and he would come up after class, he'd be like, hey, Samantha, quick question. And he'd be like, I've been studying, I'm just so excited to get to the law and policy. I've been looking at, I've been reading the Magnuson-Stevens Act. I was like, oh, that's really cool, Tyler. So I wasn't surprised at all to hear that he wanted to do a project that really had a value add for, for an agency or for somebody in the policymaking realm. What did surprise me is when Tyler, as a lawyer, told me he was going to learn to use R for his Capstone project, which, for those who don't know, it's a programming language for statistical computing, and not something that lawyers, speaking as a lawyer, it's not something that I've been interested in learning myself. So that did surprise me, and it showed me, just reinforced how interested he is in sort of pushing his boundaries, getting outside of his comfort zone for this Capstone, in the spirit of just creating something that would be really valuable and have a real life application. So please join me in welcoming Tyler He.
So, good morning. As Samantha said, my name is Tyler. And today I'm going to talk to you about estimating catch for California's recreational red abalone fishery. Before we get going, though, I'd like you all to take a moment and think about what you could buy if I handed you $15,000. Any ideas? Sounds like a lot, right? You could buy this Ford Focus. It's about $15,000. You could buy not one, but 15 new iPhones if you need that many or have that many pockets. Or if you're caught in California harvesting one of these red abalone, you could use that $15,000 to pay the fines you'd be charged. At this point, hopefully you're wondering why taking one of these little marine invertebrates is going to cost you so much money. To answer that, we have to understand the history of abalone fishing in this state. Evidence showing human use of abalone in California dates back approximately 7,000 years. And abalone shells found in middens or refuse piles, such as the one in this photo, provide evidence that abalone were an important food source for indigenous people that lived on Santa Cruz Island. Abalone shells were also an important trade item amongst indigenous people, and abalone shell artifacts and jewelry have been found in archaeological sites as far inland as Colorado. The modern abalone fisheries in California began in the 1850s with the arrival of Chinese laborers. The Chinese abalone fishermen would row along the rocky shorelines in skiffs using boat hooks to harvest abalone. And this eventually grew into a large commercial fishery in the late 1870s and into the 20th century. At its peak, California's commercial fishery produced nearly 4 million pounds of abalone each year. And this photo from the 1930s is of a pile of abalone shells from one morning's cleaning operations. This amount of catch and fishing effort, however, had its consequences. And concerns about the amount of abalone being caught resulted in periodic closures and additional restrictions for the fishery since the early 1900s. From 1952, a pattern of serial depletion gave the illusion that the commercial fishery was doing well. However, while the combined catch remained the same, the populations of each of the 5 species that were harvested continued to decline. As one species became harder to find, fishermen would move on to the next to supplement their catch. And as you can see from the series of graphs showing commercial catch in California from 1942 to 1996, starting in 1952, as catch of pink abalone seen here declined, harvest of red abalone increased to make up for this loss. And then in 1971, as catch of pink abalone dropped significantly again, a spike in the harvest of green abalone took its place. Finally, throughout the 1970s, as the harvest of red abalone steadily declined, commercial fishing efforts targeting green, pink, and black abalone peaked and then quickly tailed. From the mid-1980s to 1996, the combined catch of all 5 species remained low, and in 1996, because of the depleted population of red abalone, or of abalone from years of overfishing, the commercial fisheries were closed statewide. In 1997, following this commercial closure, all recreational abalone fishing south of San Francisco Bay was banned. After the 97 closure, however, a recreational fishery for red abalone did remain from San Francisco Bay up north to the California-Oregon border. This recreational fishery is heavily regulated. It's a breath hold fishery only, meaning that people may only pick abalone while diving and holding their breath without the use of something like scuba, as our diver is here, or pick abalone from shore. Additionally, our diver in this photo is measuring the abalone to make sure it's the minimum 7-inch length. And there are also limits on number of abalone that can be taken per day and per year. Despite these and other regulations, however, to protect abalone, the populations of red abalone have continued to decline, and this downward trend is attributed to disease, bad environmental conditions, and competition for food sources with purple urchins such as the one in this photo. And in December of last year, 2017, because of this downward trend, the recreational fishery that remained north of San Francisco Bay was closed, and this left California without any wild abalone fishing for the first time in 7,000 years. This history and the importance of abalone in California is the reason that you can be fined $15,000 if you take one. There is hope, though. For now, this closure is only for the 2018 season. It will be reevaluated later this year. And that is where the idea for my capstone came into place. So my capstone project was designed to help the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as it plans for the future of this fishery. CDFW is the department that manages fisheries in California. Specifically, my capstone set out to find a new way to estimate the total catch of abalone for a fishing season. This new model should improve the department's management of the fishery under their new fishery management plan, or FMP. An FMP is a document that lays out the objectives for that fishery, and having a properly developed FMP is really important because it lays out how decisions are going to be made for that fishery. The department is currently nearing the end of a multi-year process to develop this specific FMP, and their ultimate goal is to ensure sustainable and healthy abalone resource. An accurate estimation of catch for one season is key for the FMP to accomplish this goal. To ensure that there's a sustainable and healthy abalone resource, we want to make sure that the red abalone population in Northern California is maintained at a level that doesn't decline over time because of fishing. Knowing how much catch there is each season tells us how much we're taking out of the ocean to make sure that the management decisions made for what's left is going to be what's best for the fishery. The new FMP plans to do this by setting target catch values. Simply, we'll call it a target. The department's target is a predetermined number of abalone that the department believes will be able to take out of the ocean every season and still have a healthy population left. At the close of each season, the department wants to compare this target catch value to an estimate of what was actually taken out. This comparison will tell the department if too much abalone is taken out or if there's still a surplus left. and it will help them inform their management decisions for the next season. My capstone project was to come up with a new way to make this estimate. So since 2002, the department has been collecting information on catch and making these estimates. Traditionally, the department uses two sources of information to make these estimates. The first is an abalone report card, and the second are a set of telephone surveys. The abalone report card is simply the license you need to have in order to take abalone in this state. And on every abalone report card, you're supposed to record information about every abalone you've taken and return that card at the end of the season, regardless of what your catch was. Typically, you're not going to get 100% compliance for returning that report card at the end of a season. So in the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years, it's been about a 60% compliance rate with the amount of report cards returned. To supplement for the missing report cards, the department will conduct their annual telephone surveys. The problem with this, though, is the time that it takes to make this estimation, the time that it takes to collect the report cards, count the abalone based on that, do the surveys, telephone surveys, calculate those numbers. Typically, management decisions based on a catch estimate are going to be implemented about 2 seasons later. So my project needed to come up with a method to estimate this catch faster. My model needed to estimate catch from 1 season and reliably compare that to the department's target values that they set. And it needed to do it in a time frame that was going to allow a management decision to be made for the next season. So the model that I designed uses historical catch information from the fishery together with information from a current season's report cards only, eliminating the need for telephone survey, and estimates the catch earlier than before. So the way that I came up to do this was to examine the relationship between catch and percent of report cards returned. Specifically, knowing the catch values for the 2012 through 16 seasons, I looked at how, in comparison to the final catch that we knew, the proportion of the catch reported changed as the proportion of report cards returned increased. Simply put, as we got closer to 100% of report cards being returned in a season on the x-axis, how much of the catch for that season was reported. So after I looked at that relationship, all we need to know now to make the estimate is the nature of this relationship, the percent of report cards returned for a given season, and then the catch that is reported based on those report cards. So using those 3 pieces of information, we can estimate total abalone catch for a season. And what this graph shows are 2 different ways to estimate abalone catch. The orange line shows catch estimates using the time-consuming report card and telephone survey method that the department has used since 2002. And the blue line shows the estimates using the model that I worked on for my Capstone project, which requires much less information and can be calculated a lot earlier. In the future, the department can use this new method to estimate abalone catch earlier and compare it to these target values that they want to set. And as this graph shows, there's some difference between my estimates and the department's more data-rich final estimates that they've used. So understanding the possible ranges for error will allow them to account for that in their management decisions. There are a lot of things that I had to consider while coming up with this model. The first consideration was the traditional April 1st start date to the season. Historically, that's when the AB season has started. So we tried to, working with the department, we tried to come up with a model that could estimate fisheries catch on March 1st following the close of a season, so that by the time the next season opens, if changes needed to be made, they could be made. The model also needed to use catch information from report cards only, because traditionally from March 1st, they don't have their telephone surveys completed. And it also needed to be able to withstand future regulatory changes that may impact fishing rates for individual divers and the fishery as a whole. The new FMP also aims to manage the fishery on a more local scale. The department has set out 3 different management regions within Northern California. So the one graph that we saw here was for the total fishery, but there is also individual models for each region that use a similar process, but with different catch numbers. Some of the challenges for this project included limited data availability. I thought I was going to be working with data from 2002 through 2016. However, when we kind of got into it, I realized that I could only use information from 2012 on, because that's when we actually knew when these report cards were being returned date-wise, and that was a very important consideration. And also, accounting for, the biggest one this was the bottom line of accounting for past rule changes. We had looked at predicting catch in a number of different ways and ended up using this sort of ratio method, because using hard counts as far as looking at mean catch rates, what each diver may catch per season, we realized that with changing fishery regulations throughout the last 16, 17 years, we couldn't really predict each year based on this is a mean catch rate based on the fact that you can only take 18 a season. So accounting for those regulation changes was a big challenge. The next steps, the department's going to use this model and sort of refine it to see if it can really work for what they want to do. I'll be working with them a little bit more, actually tomorrow. And hopefully they can use the 2017 catch data that they will collect to update the model and see if we can refine it a little bit more. And eventually the FMP will be going forward for peer review on a parallel sort of process with one from the Nature Conservancy. And lastly, I'd just like to thank my, my Capstone committee, Samantha, who I cornered her to being my chair early in the summer, Dr. Laura Rogers-Bennett from the department, and then the other department scientists that really helped me out a lot, as well as fellow graduate student Jordan DiNardo, who basically taught me R, so that was critical. Thank you.
Tyler. I'm just wondering, does Cal Fish and Wildlife have any programs in place to generate fisheries independent data on the abalone stock, just to get a handle on, kind of up-to-date estimates of population without fisheries?
They do a variety of different surveys outside of just the report cards and the telephone surveys from the fishery. Some of them, I'm personally not sure, because I didn't work on that part of their updated FMP, if it's going to be included moving forward. I think there are questions about, how accurate or how reliable they were. But there are other survey methods that they have been using in order to assess stock health and things like that.
I'm so impressed that you learned R to build this model. I think that's really, really impressive, considering a few of us did some statistics as well, and we kept it really simple. But I'm curious, when you were collecting the data from the report cards, the metrics that you were using, was it catch per unit effort, or was it just total catch in general? And how did you incorporate that into building your model?
So there were a lot of different parts to this project. But in terms of the final estimate, it was raw catch on each report card. So the department uses an electronic system now that individual divers can enter, or they can send it in, and they will actually count up whatever's reported on each report card. In terms of developing this new model, we tried to look at things like CPUE and stuff like that, but the biggest difficulty was, when the Fish and Game Commission would adjust the regulation and lower the catch allowed, it obviously is going to impact what people take, and we couldn't account for that in the future. And we needed to find a way that we could estimate catch while not knowing what future regulations may be. So that's why this sort of ended up being the best way to go forward.
Gotcha.
There's one more in the back. Sorry, one more question.
Sorry about that, Tyler. I was wondering, your method should produce some sort of an uncertainty bound, right, on your estimate. And so, how does that compare with what the department has already, what their estimate is? They're all estimates, right?
So it varied by region. The total fishery estimates tended to be a little bit more accurate because of the fact that we're just working with more data. Regionally, it went anywhere from, I think it was 13% lower than their estimate to, I believe, 17% higher. And what's not discussed in this, just for the sake of people not having a headache and time, is their target catch, the department's target catch values that they want to use allows for a 25% upper and lower reference limit. So there are ways to account for the error range in terms of, depending on where the estimate is in regard to the target. You can always be a little bit more conservative with your management decision, and then later on in that season, once we have more information and the final estimate, then you can readjust halfway through. So the whole idea is the department still wants to use the final sort of two-part catch estimates with the telephone surveys and the report cards, but this is more so that looking at environmental conditions and looking at population health, they can make a decision more for sort of the conservative side of it earlier and not have to wait for the second season down the road.